What's going on, everybody? Welcome to part 2 of my Sega games not on Sega hardware series. Here we're going to go a little further back than we did last time, and we're going to look at Sega ports for the TurboGrafx/PC Engine and the NES/Famicom. All of these games were licensed by Sega and then done by other companies for these machines. Some of these games were actually not too bad, and some of these games outright sucked. Let's take a look. Altered Beast came to the PC Engine in late 1989, about a year after the Japanese Mega Drive version. Developed by NEC Avenue and licensed from Sega, this was an attempt to bring the then popular arcade game home for owners of the PC Engine. There are 2 editions of this game. There was a HuCard release, as well as a Super CD-ROM 2 version. From a technical standpoint, these were visually inferior to the Mega Drive version in a number of ways. The backgrounds lacked multi-layer scrolling, and a ton of detail was lost. And detail in the characters and enemies are often weaker. There are a few areas where the PC Engine version shined, however. Enemy deaths had closer detail to the arcade, and the wolves that hold the power-ups were much closer to the arcade sprite size. The music and sound effects vary in similar ways as well, often with the voice samples completely missing in the HuCard release. Many of these voice samples are present in the CD-ROM version, which also changed some of the level colors for the better. The CD-ROM version also includes an ultra-cheap story narration you can watch, but it's just blown-up sprites and artwork with a Japanese voiceover. While it's easy to nitpick variations in graphics and sound, these releases were solid enough on this front to deserve respect, but it's the gameplay that really hurt these releases. You have to press up on the D-pad to jump, and the game is far harder than other versions of the game. I could have lived with the increase in difficulty, but the Mega Drive version simply plays much better due to the jump being more precise, which is especially important when in human form against the tougher enemies. None of the above differences make these versions unplayable though, and I even know some who prefer them. Both are inexpensive at around $30 or less, and are curious enough ports to warrant a look. Be warned, the CD-ROM release is picky as hell when it comes to system cards, and you'll want version 1.0 for the best compatibility. A few months after Altered Beast, Renovation and Telenet Japan would release their Golden Axe port in early 1990. Unlike the Altered Beast release, I found little merit here. This is a straight up awful port of the arcade game. It's visually inferior in virtually every way, and the gameplay feels nothing like the Mega Drive and arcade releases. I mean, good lord, what a mess. The graphics themselves look like something from a bad NES game, and do nothing to take advantage of the PC Engine's superior color palette. The backgrounds have been absolutely neutered as well, and lack even the most modest of details from other releases. The PC Engine has a great sound chip in it, but you wouldn't know it from these blips and bloops here. Because these sound effects are so well known, their presentation is especially stinging, taking away from the enjoyment at every turn. If you're holding out hope that the game at least plays great, prepare for a swift kick in the balls there too, as this one plays as bad as it looks. Half the damn attacks are missing, leaving you basically to just bash on opponents over and over with the same attacks. This is crippling to a game that was simple in its depth to begin with. Even the magic spells, a truly impressive showing in the arcade and Genesis games, has been cut back here in size and visual appeal. It also lacks multiplayer, something that was key to the game's original appeal, leaving this hollow shell of a port a soulless relic of how not to design a game. For you gluttons who love bad games, it can be had complete for well under $30 at times. It's only saving grace. NEC Avenue would get the Outrun license from Sega as well, releasing the PC Engine port in late 1990. Much like the Mega Drive release, this one here is nowhere near as good as the arcade original. Consoles of the day simply lacked the sprite scaling ability to replicate that level of sophistication. But what's here is remarkably good. The game is colorful, fast, and retains enough overall visual appeal to feel like the arcade. The music is solid as well, replicating the classic tunes the arcade game is well known for. The sound effects, specifically the engine noise, is just plain awful however. Sounding more like interference coming in over your speakers, you can luckily turn it off. This leaves a slight void for those used to the arcade's presentation, but doesn't ruin the experience. Gameplay feels good too, with an even difficulty that doesn't punish you early and challenges you late. If you have a PC Engine, this is a great port of the arcade game, and in some ways, better than even the Mega Drive release. A complete copy goes for nearly $50, putting it uncomfortably close to the awesome and vastly superior Sega Saturn version. Also in late 1990, NEC Avenue would release its take on the Afterburner license, and again, we'd get a solid playing game. As with the other Superscaler ports, don't expect arcade-accurate visuals, but like Outrun, what's here preserves enough of the original presentation to feel like it should. Shockingly, there are some software scaling elements in place here that even the Mega Drive lacked, such as a zoom in on the aircraft carrier and the slowly zooming in refueling plane, adding some visual flair specific to this release. The lone blemish here is the awful canyon bonus stages, which look incredibly out of place in an otherwise decent looking game. It's a slideshow of huge blocky tiles that look broken and disjointed, but luckily only show up briefly. The music sounds good for the most part as well, lacking the punch that was typical of NEC Avenue programming, but faithful enough to enjoy. Afterburners gameplay has always been about fast movement and quick play sessions, and both are captured here faithfully, that I dare say I prefer it to the Mega Drive release. A complete in-box copy will cost you around $35, a bit expensive, but recommended for fans. Late 1989 would see a port of Sega's original Shinobi game to the PC Engine by Asmik. Unlike the Sega Master System release, this attempted to replicate the original arcade in look and gameplay, and for the most part, it succeeds. The game visually is extremely close to the arcade, with large sprites, great color use, and detailed backgrounds. It's so close in fact, you really have to ask just what the hell went on with the Altered Beast and Golden Axe ports, as this game clearly shows that the PC Engine had the chops to replicate a Sega System 16 release respectfully. The sound is even decent, with only a few off tunes and an otherwise enjoyable presentation. There are some content cuts here and there, with a few levels axed, along with a boss. This is unfortunate, but not a deal breaker, and Shinobi here remains a solid effort on the machine. The gameplay in particular is fast and responsive, and though it feels a bit different than the arcade, it's faithful enough to give you that great arcade experience at home. This one is expensive, with complete copies being rare, and often well above the $50 mark. Asmik would work with a Sega license again for the Nintendo Famicom. and in mid-1990 would release Altered Beast in Japan. In true Nintendo 8-bit form, this was not a straight port of the arcade content, and would add additional levels, enemies, bosses, and beast forms for your character. However, the arcade was all about its visual pizzazz upon release, and this takes a severe hit here. The sprites are tiny, the color has been scaled back incredibly, and it overall has very little in common with the arcade's presentation. The music is okay, but nothing to play the game for, and of course has lost all the voice samples. The burning question often argued, is this better than the Sega Master System version? Is the Famicom's smoother gameplay and added content a win? Or does Sega's 8-bit powerhouse take the crown because of its visuals? It's a pointless argument really, as both these games are rough as hell. I think the Famicom version would have benefited more by focusing on the new content entirely. The added stages look much better than the arcade ported stuff, and even the new beasts play better. As it stands though, this is a really bad looking version of a game that relied on its visual presentation to draw you in. The game runs high complete in box, usually in excess of $50, making it for absolute diehards only. In an odd turn of events, Tengen, or Tengen if you prefer, released Shinobi on the NES in North America in 1989. This unlicensed game was a port of the Sega Master System code, altered in various ways. Attack animations and power-ups were cut down to only a few, and some of the stages were reconfigured to scroll only horizontally. It was quite close outside of these changes, replicating the look, feel, and sounds with surprising success. The color doesn't pop quite as nice as the Sega Master System version. There's more sprite flicker, and the music doesn't come off quite the same, all making the Sega Master System version the one to own if faced with a choice. This version is also much harder to find complete in box, and if you do, it easily goes for $40 or more. You can do a lot worse when it comes to Sega ports on the NES, and I honestly enjoyed my time with this game. It has its drawbacks, and I recommend the Sega Master System version if you have the system, but this one has its merits and is definitely worth a look for fans of the series. Another one that gets compared to its Sega Master System counterpart is Space Harrier for the Famicom, released in early 1989 by Takara. Unlike the Shinobi port, this one looks and sounds nothing like the previously released Sega Master System game. Here, we get smoother scrolling, but it comes at the cost of slower character movement, smaller sprites, and a dramatically reduced color palette. There's also noticeable slowdown in areas, and a fair amount of sprite flicker that seems ever present no matter what's going on. The music sounds quite a bit different, but retains the overall feel of the classic arcade tunes. Although movement is slower, the gameplay can be adjusted to, and ends up being fairly playable. Bosses take a massive hit in size and detail, which actually makes defeating them kind of a pain in the ass. Fights go on for far too long, even when I tried pelting them with rapid fire. It's also more expensive than you'd think, going loose for $20 or so, and twice that complete. I'm not sure it's worth that much outside of collectors and serious fans, so fire it up on your favorite emulator and see if you like it first. Now of course I didn't cover every single Sega game that's available for these two pieces of hardware. I wanted to save some games for a later episode and not overburden this particular one with just looking at the same games across multiple hardwares. As a matter of fact, I'm going to change things up even further in part 3 of this by actually jetting forward and looking at compilations of Sega games for other hardware. We're going to take a look at that next time. I'm Sega Lord X. I really appreciate you guys watching. I'll catch you next time.